They manifest in the periphery of our vision, fleeting figures darker than the surrounding night. Since the dawn of recorded history, accounts have emerged from every corner of the globe describing these entities. The shadow men. Are they a trick of the light, a product of an overactive imagination, or something far more tangible and ancient? For millions, the answer is terrifyingly clear. The experience often begins in the twilight state between wakefulness and sleep. A 2011 report from a woman in rural Ohio details a classic encounter. She awoke, unable to move, a state modern science calls sleep paralysis. But this was no simple dream. Standing in the corner of her room was a tall, man-shaped silhouette, devoid of any features, its form absorbing the moonlight that filtered through her window. She describes a feeling of pure, primal dread, an instinctual terror that this was not a hallucination. It felt, she said, more real than reality. As she struggled against her paralysis, the figure simply watched, its presence an immense silent weight in the room. Then, as suddenly as it appeared, it dissolved into the shadows from which it came. This pattern is repeated with unsettling consistency. From the Hat Man, a particularly distinct figure often seen wearing a fedora and a long coat, to smaller, more erratic, skittering shadows, the descriptions share a common, terrifying core, a humanoid shape made of pure, featureless darkness. Skeptics point to hypnagogic hallucinations, vivid, dreamlike sensations that occur as one is falling asleep. They argue that our brains, in this vulnerable state, project our deepest fears into the environment, personifying the darkness. The human mind is hardwired to recognize faces and figures, a phenomenon known as pareidolia. In a darkened room, a pile of clothes on a chair can easily morph into a lurking figure when viewed through the lens of a half-asleep mind. But what about the encounters that happen in broad daylight to people who are wide awake? In 2018, a pair of hikers in the Appalachian Mountains reported a chilling experience. While resting near a dense thicket of trees, one of them noticed a flicker of movement. They described it as a hole in the scenery, a patch of black that seemed to move independently of the shifting leaves and branches. It was vaguely man-shaped, and as they watched, it detached itself from the shadows of the forest and glided silently across a sunlit clearing before disappearing into the woods on the other side. They both saw it. They were both sober, alert, and terrified. The sound of birds and insects, they recalled, had completely ceased. The forest fell into an unnatural silence, returning only after the figure had vanished. Investigators who specialize in these phenomena often employ a range of equipment to try and capture evidence. Full-spectrum cameras, thermal imaging, and extremely low-frequency ELF detectors are standard tools of the trade. During a 2021 investigation of an abandoned hospital in West Virginia, a place with a long history of shadow person sightings, a team captured a compelling piece of thermal footage. In an empty hallway, a cold spot shaped like a human being appeared, several degrees colder than the ambient temperature. It lingered for nearly 30 seconds, moving slowly down the corridor before dissipating. There was no physical source for the temperature drop, no open window or draft. On the standard video camera running simultaneously, nothing was visible. It was a cold, moving void. Could these beings be interdimensional? Some theorists propose that what we are witnessing are glimpses into a parallel reality, one that briefly overlaps with our own. Physicist Michio Kaku has spoken about the possibility of multiple dimensions existing alongside our own, invisible to us. If a being from a higher dimension were to pass through our three-dimensional space, we might only perceive a cross-section of it, a distorted and fleeting shadow of its true form. This could explain their bizarre, non-physical behavior, their ability to walk through walls, fade into nothing, and move in ways that defy our understanding of physics. The psychological impact on witnesses is profound and lasting. Many report developing a persistent fear of the dark, anxiety, and a feeling of being constantly watched. A man from Oregon who had recurring encounters with a shadow figure in his childhood home spoke of the entity's apparent awareness. It wasn't just standing there, he stated. It knew I was looking at it. The The moment I made eye contact, the feeling of dread intensified 100 times over. It felt like it was feeding on my fear. This concept of a parasitic entity that subsists on negative human emotion is a common thread in witness testimony. It suggests a malevolent intelligence, a predator that operates on a psychic rather than physical level. Historically, these figures are not a new phenomenon. They are found in folklore and mythology across cultures, often under different names. In Islamic lore, the jinn are beings of smokeless fire that can take on various forms, including shadows. German folklore speaks of the doppelganger, a shadowy double of a living person, often seen as an omen of misfortune. Japanese legends describe the nopperabo, a faceless ghost that appears as a dark silhouette. The consistency of these stories, separated by thousands of miles and thousands of years, suggests a shared human experience that transcends cultural boundaries. Our ancestors saw them too. They named them, feared them, and warned against them. Consider the quantum zeno effect, a bizarre principle of quantum mechanics where the act of observing a system can prevent it from changing. Could our attention, our focus, somehow hold these entities in our reality for a brief moment? When we catch them in our peripheral vision, they are in an unfixed potential state. But when we turn to look directly, our focused observation forces them to resolve, and they vanish. This might explain why they are so difficult to see clearly and why they so often disappear the instant they are noticed. They exist, quite literally, on the edge of perception. Footage captured on home security cameras has added a new modern layer to the mystery. A clip from a suburban home in Texas went viral in 2019. It shows a shadowy, elongated figure darting across the driveway at an impossible speed. The family dog, sleeping on the porch, bolts upright and begins barking furiously at the empty space where the figure had been. Debunkers claimed it was a camera glitch, a compression artifact, or perhaps an insect flying close to the lens, but the timing of the dog's reaction is difficult to explain away. The animal reacted to something that, to the naked eye, wasn't there. Animals, with their different sensory ranges, are often reported to react to these entities before humans even notice them. During an overnight investigation in a historic English castle, a paranormal team recorded an electronic voice phenomenon, or EVP. They had been asking questions into the darkness of the dungeons, a known hotspot for shadow sightings. In the silence between questions, a digital recorder captured a faint, whispery voice. When amplified and filtered, the voice seems to utter a single chilling word, behind. At that exact moment, one of the investigators reported feeling an icy cold touch on the back of his neck and seeing a tall shadow move past a doorway in his peripheral vision. The connection to places of intense human emotion, hospitals, prisons, battlefields, is also undeniable. It seems these entities are drawn to locations saturated with residual energy, be it suffering, fear, or despair. This has led some to theorize they are a form of psychic imprint, a memory replaying itself on the environment. But this theory fails to account for the interactive nature of many encounters. The feeling of being watched, the intelligent movement, and the direct responses to investigators. An imprint doesn't react. It doesn't instill a sense of active, malevolent intelligence. One of the most unsettling types of encounter involves not just a single figure, but multiple entities. A family in Pennsylvania abandoned their home in 2016 after months of escalating activity. It began with fleeting glimpses of shadows in hallways. It progressed to seeing figures standing over their beds at night. The climax came when the parents saw a group of at least 5 tall, thin shadows gathered in their living room, seemingly conferring with each other in complete silence before turning in unison to look at the terrified couple and then simply fading away. The family left that night and never returned, convinced their home had become a nexus point, a doorway for these beings. Some have attempted to link the phenomenon to infrasound, low-frequency sound below the range of human hearing. Frequencies around 19 Hz have been shown to cause feelings of unease, dread, and even visual distortions, including seeing shadowy figures in the periphery. A team of British scientists was able to replicate these effects in a controlled laboratory setting. Could naturally occurring infrasound, generated by wind, distant storms, or even industrial machinery, be responsible for some sightings. It's a plausible explanation for some cases, but it doesn't cover all of them. It doesn't explain the distinct hat man figure seen by different people in different locations, nor does it explain the physical evidence like cold spots or the reactions of animals. The truth remains elusive, hidden in the dark corners of our world and our minds. For every scientific explanation, there is an account that defies it. For every skeptic, there is a witness whose life has been forever changed by a fleeting glimpse into a reality that is not supposed to exist. They are seen in bedrooms and backyards, in ancient castles and modern office buildings. They are silent watchers, fleeting phantoms, and for some, terrifying intruders. The evidence, both anecdotal and instrumental, continues to mount. They leave behind no footprints, no fingerprints, only a lingering sense of cold and a deep, unsettling question. We may not know what they are or what they want, but one thing is becoming increasingly clear. We are not alone in the dark. The shadows are watching. They often appear in pairs, a boy and a girl, rarely older than 16, yet their voices carry a strange, disquieting authority. Witnesses describe an overwhelming sense of dread, a primal fear that screams at them to keep the door shut, to drive away, to not, under any circumstances, let them in. The children are polite, almost unnervingly so. "Let us in," they'll say. "We need to use your phone." Or, "Our parents will be here soon. Can we wait inside?" The requests are simple, mundane even, but they are delivered with an intensity that belies their words. Their insistence grows with each refusal, their calm demeanor cracking to reveal an unnerving anger. The polite requests become demands, laced with an unspoken threat. Those who have encountered them and lived to tell the tale speak of the eyes, solid black, from pupil to sclera, like a shark's or something not of this world. There is no white, no color, just an endless light-devouring void. To look into them is to feel a cold, psychic pressure, an invasive feeling of being scrutinized, judged, and found wanting. Survivors report a lingering sense of being watched for days, even weeks, after the encounter. Shadows seem to move in their peripheral vision, and the feeling of dread returns at odd hours, a chilling echo of that fateful knock on the door. The first widely reported incident dates back to 1996 in Abilene, Texas. Journalist Brian Bethel chronicled his encounter with two such children outside a movie theater. They approached his car, asking for a ride home to retrieve money for movie tickets. He felt an inexplicable, paralyzing fear as they spoke. It wasn't until he almost unlocked his car door that he truly saw their eyes. He described them as coal black, devoid of any human feature. He sped away, his heart pounding, and glanced in his rearview mirror to see they had vanished without a trace. His story, posted on an early internet forum, opened the floodgates. Suddenly, similar accounts began to surface from all corners of the globe. Stories that had previously been dismissed as nightmares or overactive imaginations. But are these encounters truly a modern phenomenon? Or are they a contemporary manifestation of a much older, more sinister folklore? Ancient tales from across the world warn of trickster spirits and malevolent entities that take the form of children to prey on the unsuspecting. In Irish and Scottish lore, there are the changelings, fey creatures left in place of a stolen human baby. These impostors often appeared sickly or unnaturally wise and brought misfortune to the family that took them in. European folklore is rife with stories of demonic entities and goblins that would mimic the cries of a lost child to lure travelers off their path and into danger. These beings were said to feed on human life force, on fear, or on the soul itself. Could the black-eyed children be a modern iteration of these ancient predators, adapting their methods for a new age? Instead of a dark forest path, they now haunt suburban doorsteps and lonely parking lots. The pattern is eerily consistent. They appear at liminal spaces, doorways, car windows, thresholds between the safety of the inside and the uncertainty of the outside. They need to be invited in. This detail is crucial and appears in vampire lore and stories of demonic possession across countless cultures. It suggests a rule, a supernatural law they must abide by. They cannot cross a threshold uninvited. This limitation is both their weakness and the source of their terrifying psychological games. They don't use physical force, they use manipulation, guilt, and a creeping supernatural dread to wear down their victims' resolve. We won't hurt you, they promise, but the silent terror they radiate tells a very different story. One account from a woman in Vermont tells of a snowy night. 2 children, a boy and a girl, no older than 10, appeared on her porch, shivering without coats. Their skin was unnaturally pale against the falling snow. They asked to come inside to get warm. Her maternal instincts warred with a deep-seated panic she couldn't explain. She offered to bring them blankets and hot chocolate to the porch, but they refused. "That won't help. You have to let us in." As her husband came to the door, he saw their eyes and immediately slammed it shut, bolting it. The children didn't shout. They simply stood there, staring at the door. When the couple dared to look through the peephole minutes later, the children were gone, but there were no footprints in the fresh snow. It was as if they had never been there at all, except for the lingering icy dread that clung to the house for months. Another story comes from a long-haul truck driver who pulled into a desolate rest stop in the early hours of the morning. A single child tapped on his passenger side window. The driver, tired and wanting to be left alone, ignored him. The tapping became more insistent, a rhythmic, unnerving knock. The driver finally turned and saw a boy of about 12, with a pale face and a hoodie pulled low. "I'm lost," the boy said, his voice flat and emotionless. "I need to use your phone to call my mom." The trucker felt a wave of nausea and a sudden intense headache. He pointed to the well-lit service station 100 yards away. "There's a phone in there," he said. The boy's face contorted with anger. "No, I need to use your phone. Let me in." It was then that the driver saw the eyes, black pits that seemed to reflect no light from the brightly lit rest stop. He threw the truck into gear and sped away, not daring to look back, the sound of the boy's furious scream echoing in his mind. What is their purpose? What do they want? Some paranormal researchers theorize they are a type of energy vampire feeding off the intense fear they generate. Others believe they are precursors to a great tragedy, omens of disaster appearing in an area shortly before a catastrophic event. A more terrifying theory suggests they are soul collectors, demonic or interdimensional beings who need permission to enter a life, to claim a person as their own. The act of letting them in is symbolic of surrendering one's will, one's home, and perhaps one's very soul. The common thread in all these theories is that they are not human. Their pale, almost translucent skin, their monotone voices, their lack of normal emotional response, and of course their terrifying, soulless eyes all point to something other. Consider the medical and psychological possibilities. Could this be a rare, undiagnosed medical condition? Unlikely, given the global spread and identical descriptions. Could it be a shared hallucination, a manifestation of modern anxieties? Perhaps, but the physical evidence reported in some cases, like the lack of footprints in the snow or the sudden inexplicable electronic malfunctions that occurred during their appearances, suggests an external physical presence. The encounters feel too real, too visceral to be dismissed as mere psychological projection. Victims are left shaken to their core, often suffering from PTSD-like symptoms. Their lives are forever altered by a few moments of inexplicable terror at their own front door. The phenomenon forces us to confront the fragility of our perceived safety. Our homes, our cars, we see them as fortresses, safe havens from the dangers of the outside world. But the black-eyed children challenge that belief. They prove that sometimes the most terrifying thing in the world is a simple knock on the door, a polite request that masks a horrifying intent. They exploit our ingrained sense of empathy and social obligation. We are taught to help children in need, to be compassionate. Their strategy is to turn this virtue into a weapon against us. They are a test of intuition versus indoctrination, of primal fear versus social conditioning. To fail the test is to open the door, and no one who has ever opened the door has been able to tell us what happens next. The stories simply end there. The house is found empty. The person vanishes. All that remains is the chilling account of the visitor, and the lingering question of what lies behind those solid black eyes. The thermal camera shows nothing, just the cold, damp walls of the Waverly Hills Sanatorium. But the audio recorder, that's a different story. Listen, it's a whisper, almost too faint to register, but it's there. A disembodied voice in the heart of the death tunnel, a 500-foot chute used to transport the bodies of tuberculosis patients away from the eyes of the living. For decades, this place was a fortress against a plague, a place of last resort. But for thousands, it was simply the last place. They say the spirits of those who died here, isolated and afraid, never truly left. Our EMF meters are spiking erratically near the entrance to what was once the morgue. A cold spot develops, the temperature dropping a sudden 15 degrees. Is it just a draft in this derelict building, or is it the shadow people? Visitors so often report seeing flitting down these long, dark corridors. They say a nurse, heartbroken and alone, took her own life in room 502. Staff and investigators alike have reported seeing a figure in the window, hearing a woman's soft crying, and even being pushed by an unseen force. The historical record is grim. The sheer volume of suffering concentrated within these walls is almost incomprehensible. Each creak of the floorboards, each gust of wind through a broken window pane feels like a residual echo of that pain. Now we're deep inside the Trans-Allegheny Lunatic Asylum in West Virginia. This Gothic stone behemoth was designed to house 250 patients. By the 1950s, nearly 2,400 souls were crammed inside, living in squalor and desperation. The asylum's history is a catalogue of human misery, a place where archaic and often brutal treatments were the norm. We're on the 4th floor, the Civil War wing, which housed the most violent and unpredictable patients. The air here is heavy, oppressive. We've been using a spirit box, a device that scans radio frequencies, supposedly allowing entities to form words. For the last 10 minutes, one name has repeated over and over: Lily. Historical records mention a young girl named Lily, a permanent resident who grew up and died within these walls. Visitors leave toys for her in her old room, and those toys are often found moved, sometimes thrown across the room with considerable force. Our camera operator just reported feeling a distinct tug on his sleeve, but a 360-degree sweep shows no one there. The full-spectrum camera is picking up orbs, which some investigators dismiss as dust. But these are moving with intelligent patterns, darting away from our flashlights and seeming to coalesce in the darkest corners of the room. It's in these corners that people report seeing the creeper, a dark, stooped figure that crawls along the floors and walls, a terrifying apparition documented by countless paranormal teams. Is this a manifestation of the collective despair, or the spirit of a specific, tormented individual? The energy shifts as we enter the lobotomy ward. Thousands of these procedures were performed here, many with a simple ice pick-like instrument. The procedure was crude, the results catastrophic. The residual anguish is palpable. We've set up a static night vision camera in the main ward, hoping to capture some of the shadow figures frequently seen darting between the decaying beds. The REM pod, a device that creates its own electromagnetic field and alerts to disturbances, has been silent for an hour. Suddenly it shrieks to life, all its lights flashing at once. At the same exact moment, on the far side of the ward, a wheelchair, untouched for decades, begins to roll slowly, its rusted wheels groaning in the silence. It moves about 10 feet, then stops abruptly, turning as if to face us. There is no wind, no incline. We are the only living people on this entire floor. We're attempting to communicate, asking if the spirit of a former patient is responsible. The spirit box crackles, and a single clear word comes through: get. The warning is unmistakable. The asylum itself seems to be rejecting our presence, its stone walls holding secrets and sorrows that defy rational explanation. Now, Pennhurst. The Pennhurst State School and Hospital in Pennsylvania is not a traditional asylum, but its history is arguably more disturbing. This was a facility for the mentally and physically disabled. But reports from the 1960s exposed a house of horrors, neglect, abuse, and inhumane conditions that shocked the nation. We're in the Mayflower building, one of the most notoriously active locations on the property. This is where the most severely disabled children were housed, often left in cribs for their entire lives. The sounds recorded here are harrowing. Children crying, metallic scraping sounds, and aggressive growls that seem to come from the very walls. Our sound engineer is filtering the audio right now, isolating a clear, childlike laugh that was not audible to our ears when we recorded it. It's cheerful, yet utterly terrifying in this context. Staff members who worked here in its final years spoke of an overwhelming feeling of being watched, of doors slamming shut, and of objects being thrown by an unseen poltergeist. They called it the King, an aggressive entity believed to be the spirit of a former abusive staff member, still tormenting the vulnerable even in death. We're moving through the underground tunnels that connect the buildings. These were used to move patients, but they've become a focal point for paranormal activity. The walls are covered in graffiti, but underneath strange, scratch-like markings are etched into the concrete. Our thermal imager is picking up a handprint on the wall. It's glowing with heat, as if someone just pressed their hand against the cold surface, but it fades as quickly as it appeared. We are completely alone down here, or so we thought. The motion detector we placed at the far end of the tunnel has just been triggered. Something is moving in the darkness just beyond the range of our lights. We can hear it now, a slow, deliberate dragging sound. It's getting closer. There's a distinct feeling of malice in the air, a predatory presence that feels ancient and deeply angry. We're told never to turn our backs in these tunnels. Now we understand why. The temperature is plummeting again. The batteries in our primary camera and our flashlights have just died simultaneously, plunging us into near total darkness, with only the faint red glow of the recording light to see by. The dragging sound stops. It's right in front of us. The smoke that billows from the cracked earth of Centralia, Pennsylvania, carries more than just the stench of burning coal. It carries whispers, stories of things seen and heard in the haze that have clung to this town long before the fires began. Even in the 1960s and 70s, as the underground mine fire silently spread its tendrils beneath their homes, residents spoke of unease. They would see strange, glowing lights bobbing in the woods at the edge of town, where no roads or houses stood. Locals would dismiss it as swamp gas or teenagers with flashlights, yet the lights moved with an unnerving intelligence, sometimes hovering for hours before winking out. Old-timers who worked the mines had their own tales. They spoke of the Tommy knockers, spirits of deceased miners said to knock on the walls of the tunnels to warn of an impending collapse. But in Centralia, the knocks were different. They weren't warnings. They were described as frantic, desperate, as if something was trying to claw its way out from deep within the earth. More than one miner quit, swearing they heard not just knocking, but guttural screams echoing from sealed-off shafts, screams that sounded distinctly inhuman. As the ground began to warm and sinkholes opened, the strange occurrences intensified. The smoke wasn't just smoke anymore. People started seeing shapes within it, fleeting silhouettes that twisted and writhed in the gray plumes. A volunteer firefighter, responding to a brush fire near the Oddfellows cemetery, swore he saw a tall, gaunt figure standing amongst the tombstones, its form flickering like a heat haze. When he called out, it dissolved back into the smoke, leaving only the smell of sulfur and something else, something acrid and organic like burnt meat. The evacuations of the 1980s turned Centralia into a ghost town, but the phenomena didn't leave with the people. In fact, with the town empty, they seemed to grow bolder. The handful of residents who refused to leave became unwilling witnesses. One of the last remaining families reported hearing children's laughter outside their home at night, even though the nearest child lived miles away. The laughter would often be followed by the sound of phantom footsteps on their porch, and the frantic scratching of what sounded like long nails on their front door. They eventually installed a steel door, but the scratching continued night after night. Reporters and paranormal investigators who visited in the 90s came away with chilling evidence. Audio recordings captured disembodied voices whispering from the steam vents, words spoken in a language none could identify. One investigator's thermal camera, pointed at a particularly dense cloud of smoke rising from a fissure in the middle of what was once Locust Avenue, registered a man-shaped cold spot. It was 10 degrees colder than the surrounding superheated air, a physical impossibility. As they watched, the shape on the thermal camera lunged towards them before the camera malfunctioned, its battery instantly and inexplicably drained. The few who dare to walk the graffiti highway, the buckled stretch of Route 61, often report a feeling of being watched, not by a person, but by something ancient and territorial. They speak of seeing movement at the periphery of their vision, dark shapes darting between the skeletal trees that line the road. Some have even captured photographs of the smoke where, upon later inspection, faces seem to manifest. Agonized, contorted faces with hollow eyes and gaping mouths, visible for just a fraction of a second within the swirling vapor. The source of these hauntings is a matter of local legend. One story points to a curse laid upon the land by a traveling priest who was supposedly murdered by a group of miners in the 1860s. Before he died, he is said to have damned the town, proclaiming that one day a fire would be lit that would never be extinguished, and that his unquiet spirit would ensure no one would ever know peace there again. Another, darker tale speaks of something the miners disturbed deep underground, an entity that was never meant to be found, imprisoned within the coal seams. They say the fire didn't just ignite the coal, it burned through the walls of this ancient prison, and the smoke is the very essence of the creature as it seeps out into our world. This entity, sometimes called the Centralia smog walker by modern cryptid hunters, is rarely seen clearly. It is a being of smoke and shadow, defined more by its absence of form than its presence. Witnesses describe it not as a solid creature, but as a void in the smoke, a patch of moving darkness that seems to absorb light. Its movements are said to be unnatural, a crawling, rolling motion, as if it's still adapting to existence outside the crushing pressure of the deep earth. The screams are perhaps the most terrifying aspect. They are not human screams of pain or fear. They are described as a cacophony, a blend of geologic stress and biological agony. People who have heard them say it sounds like the very rock is screaming as it's being torn apart, mixed with the shriek of something being boiled alive. The sound seems to emanate from everywhere at once, from the ground beneath your feet, from the air around you, and from inside your own head. A group of urban explorers in the early 2000s spent a night camping near the town's Orthodox church, one of the few buildings still standing. At around 3 a.m., they were awakened by a low, rhythmic thumping that seemed to shake the very ground. It grew louder and closer. Peeking from their tent, they saw the source. Rising from a long fissure that had opened in the churchyard was a column of thick, black smoke, far darker than the usual gray steam. Within this column a shape was coalescing, a humanoid form over 8 feet tall, with impossibly long, thin limbs that seemed to drag on the ground. It didn't walk. It pulled itself along, its smoky tendrils gripping the scorched earth and leaving behind streaks of greasy black residue. The explorers fled, not even stopping to pack their gear, and later recounted that as they ran, they could hear a high-pitched chittering sound, like a billion insects carried on the wind behind them. The residue it leaves behind is another mystery. It's a tar-like substance that cools into a brittle, glassy material. Geologists who have covertly analyzed samples have been baffled. It contains known elements from the coal seams, sulfur, carbon, but also trace elements that don't correspond to anything in the local geology. More disturbingly, it contains complex organic compounds that, as one anonymous researcher put it, share characteristics with necrotic tissue. The very air in Centralia feels wrong. It's not just the heat or the smell. There's an oppressive weight, a psychic pressure that bears down on you the deeper you go. Visitors often experience sudden, intense paranoia, headaches, and nausea. Some report auditory hallucinations, hearing their name whispered right beside their ear when they are completely alone. This has been dismissed as the effects of carbon monoxide and other toxic gases, but it doesn't explain the specificity or why the whispers often seem to know personal details about the visitor. The creature seems drawn to the hottest parts of the fire. Thermal imaging has tracked anomalous heat signatures moving through the underground network of tunnels, signatures that defy the known flow of the fire. It's as if something is navigating the labyrinth of flames, not being consumed by it, but thriving within it. Some theorize that it feeds on the heat, that the mine fire is not just its habitat, but its life source. This would explain why the phenomena have only grown stronger over the decades as the fire continues to burn. There's an account from a former resident who returned in 2012 to retrieve a family heirloom he'd buried in his backyard. As he dug, the ground began to tremble. A plume of acrid steam erupted from the hole he was digging, and for a terrifying second, he saw it. Not a silhouette or a shadow, but a face. It was composed entirely of swirling gray ash and embers, with two burning coals for eyes. It had a wide, lipless mouth that opened to release a silent scream, a wave of pure heat and malice that threw him backward. He scrambled away, leaving the heirloom behind, and never looked back. He claims that for weeks afterward, he would smell the phantom scent of sulfur and ash in his new home, hundreds of miles away. The graffiti on the highway tells its own story. Amidst the spray-painted jokes and names, there are warnings. Don't breathe the smoke. It sees you. The ground bleeds. And then there are the strange recurring symbols, spirals and jagged lightning-like sigils that don't match any known graffiti tags. These symbols are often found near new fissures or sinkholes, almost as if they are markers, or perhaps attempts by someone or something to communicate. The thing in Centralia is not a ghost. Ghosts are echoes of the past. This is an active presence, an intelligence that interacts with its environment. It has been observed moving objects, its smoky tendrils wrapping around dead trees and snapping them with audible cracks. A documentary crew's drone, sent to fly over the most active areas, was suddenly sent tumbling from the sky. The final footage before it crashed showed a tendril of black smoke shooting up from a vent and wrapping around one of its propellers. The few animals that remain in the area behave erratically. Flocks of birds will suddenly divert their course, flying in bizarre, unnatural patterns to avoid crossing over the town limits. Deer found dead at the edge of the woods show no signs of injury or disease, but their bodies are often desiccated, as if all the moisture has been cooked out of them from the inside. What is truly frightening is the thought that the fire is spreading. Geologists predict it has enough coal to burn for another 250 years. As it moves, it will breach new ground, opening new vents. Will the creature spread with it? Is Centralia not a containment zone but a breeding ground? The smoke continues to rise, a constant, silent testament to the fire below and the unknown horror it has unleashed upon the world. It carries the whispers of the past and perhaps a warning for the future. The earth there is scarred, broken, and breathing, and what it's exhaling is not just smoke, it's something alive. The entity's voice, described as a raspy, disembodied whisper, would fill the house at all hours. It knew things. Intimate secrets, private conversations held miles away, future events. The spirit identified itself as Kate Batts. A neighbor, John Bell, had apparently cheated in a land deal. But the scope of its power suggested something far older, something more elemental. This was no simple ghost of a wronged woman. The phenomena escalated from strange noises in the walls to physical assaults. Slaps, scratches, and hair-pulling became commonplace, primarily targeting John Bell and his youngest daughter Betsy. Betsy in particular suffered relentless torment. She was pinched, pricked with invisible pins, and thrown from her bed by an unseen force. The entity would sing hymns, quote scripture verbatim, and then devolve into shrieking profanities. It demonstrated an intelligence that was both terrifying and baffling. Witnesses from across the region flocked to the Bell farm, hoping to experience the legend for themselves. Many left as believers. One notable visitor was Andrew Jackson, then a general in the Tennessee militia, later to become the 7th President of the United States. Jackson and his men, initially skeptical, arrived at the farm ready to debunk the tale. But as they approached the property, their wagon mysteriously stopped, rooted to the spot. No amount of whipping or coaxing could move the horses. A metallic voice then echoed from the woods, announcing it would let them pass, but promising to visit them later that night. Shaken, Jackson's party proceeded to the Bell home. Later, a braggart in his group, a self-proclaimed witch tamer, was violently attacked by the entity, thrown about the room until he begged for his life. Jackson himself reportedly stated, "I would rather face the entire British Army than spend another night with the Bell Witch." The entity's malevolence seemed to focus on John Bell Sr. It swore a vow to end his life, a promise it would keep. John's health began a steep decline. He suffered from facial seizures and difficulty swallowing, symptoms that the spirit openly mocked and claimed to be causing. In December of 1820, John Bell fell into a stupor from which he would not wake. A strange vial of dark liquid was discovered in the medicine cabinet. When a drop was administered to the family cat, the animal died almost instantly. The Bell Witch's voice then filled the home, cackling with glee, confessing that it had given John a dose of the poison as he slept. John Bell Sr. became one of the first individuals in American history whose death was officially attributed to supernatural means. But the entity wasn't finished. It disrupted the funeral, singing bawdy drinking songs as John's body was lowered into the grave. The lore surrounding the Bell Witch taps into a deep vein of early American folklore, one that predates the Salem trials. It speaks of elemental spirits, entities tied to the land itself, disturbed by the arrival of settlers. Was Kate Batts merely a convenient name, a mask for something ancient and territorial? The entity's ability to manipulate the physical world, to manifest voices and to demonstrate clairvoyance points towards a power far beyond that of a typical human spirit. It's a force of nature, a genius loci, angered by the taming of the wilderness. The Bells weren't just haunted by a ghost. They were under siege by a piece of the old, wild world they sought to conquer. The spirit promised to return in 7 years, and it did in 1828, for a brief period of haunting focused on John Bell Jr. Then it promised a final return, 107 years later, in 1935. To this day, the area around the old Bell farm remains a hotbed of paranormal activity. We've brought our equipment to the site of the original Bell homestead in Adams, Tennessee. The cabin is long gone, but the land itself seems to hold a memory. Our electromagnetic field meters are already showing erratic fluctuations, spiking in areas with no discernible power source. The air is heavy still. We're beginning an EVP session, electronic voice phenomenon, hoping to capture any residual spiritual energy that lingers here. We start with a simple question. Is there anyone here who wants to communicate? The silence that follows is profound. We play back the recording. Through the static, a faint, wispy sound can be heard. We isolate and amplify it. The words are chillingly clear. Get out. We ask another question, addressing the entity by its chosen name. Kate, are you still here? The meters in our hands spike violently. A cold spot develops right in the center of our circle, the temperature dropping nearly 20 degrees in a matter of seconds. One of our team members, a skeptic until this point, suddenly cries out, grabbing his arm. We rush over. On his skin, 3 bright red scratch marks are welling up, as if drawn by invisible claws. There was no one and nothing near him. Panic begins to set in. We play back the last recording. This time the voice is stronger. No longer a whisper, but a harsh, guttural growl that seems to come from all directions at once. I'm still here. The voice has a strange, layered quality, like multiple voices speaking in unison. It's a sound that defies explanation, a sound that resonates with centuries of fear. We're standing on ground where a powerful, intelligent, and malevolent entity proved its existence beyond any doubt. It tormented a family, took a life, and defied a future president. The energy here is not just residual, it's active, it's aware. We ask one final question, our voices trembling. What do you want? The EMF meter in my hand goes dead. The camera's battery, fully charged moments ago, drains completely. And from the darkness of the surrounding trees, we hear a sound that isn't on any recording. A high, mocking laugh. The entity's influence extends to a nearby cave, now known as the Bell Witch Cave. It was here the spirit would often retreat, and where Betsy Bell and some local children claim to have had bizarre experiences. including being led by a phantom rabbit and getting lost in its labyrinthine passages, only to be guided out by the spirit itself. This duality is one of the most perplexing aspects of the haunting. At times, the entity showed a strange, almost protective side. It would discuss theological matters with Lucy Bell, John's wife, and even showed concern for her well-being. It warned the family of impending dangers and seemed to possess a complex moral code, however warped. It hated John Bell, but it didn't seem to hate everyone. This wasn't mindless chaos, it was calculated, purposeful torment mixed with moments of inexplicable lucidity, even kindness. This suggests an intelligence that operates on a level we can't fully comprehend, its motives as alien as its nature. Revisiting the recordings from our investigation, we find more than we initially heard. Buried deep in the white noise are other voices, whispers that overlap the main entity's responses. They speak in what sounds like an archaic dialect, phrases and words that haven't been common for centuries. It's as if the land itself is speaking through our devices, a chorus of echoes from the past. The Bell Witch wasn't a singular entity, but perhaps a focal point, a conductor for a symphony of paranormal phenomena rooted in this specific location. The story isn't about one ghost, it's about a place that is fundamentally different, a tear in the veil between our world and another. The land here remembers. It remembers the Bells, it remembers Andrew Jackson, and it remembers what came before them. The scratches on our team member's arm faded after a few hours, but the memory of that raw, unseen power remains. We captured evidence that suggests the legend is far from over. The spirit vowed to return, and based on our experience, it never truly left. It's waiting, watching from the cave, from the trees, from the very soil beneath our feet. The haunting of the Bell family may have ended in the 19th century, but the story of the entity that plagued them is still being written, and it seems to be looking for new characters. The question is not whether the Bell Witch is real, but rather who it will visit next. The energy on this land is palpable, a lingering static charge waiting for a connection. When we ask, "Is anyone here?" something answers. The recordings show it. The physical evidence proves it. The entity isn't a story from the past. It's a present and active force. We came looking for a ghost story and found something much more unsettling. We found a place where the rules of our reality simply don't apply, where a disembodied voice can scratch you from across the room, and where a centuries-old promise of return feels like an imminent threat. The air grows cold again, and the equipment begins to flicker. It knows we're talking about it. The city of Guanajuato, Mexico, a vibrant labyrinth of colonial architecture and winding alleyways, holds a secret far darker than its sun-drenched streets suggest. Beneath the city, in the catacombs of the Santa Paula Pantheon, lies a chilling assembly, the mummies of Guanajuato. These are not the carefully wrapped relics of ancient Egypt. They are the naturally preserved remains of the city's former residents, their bodies desiccated by the region's unique mineral-rich soil and arid climate. But what makes them truly terrifying are their faces, mouths agape, features twisted in silent agony. They are forever frozen in a final horrifying scream. For over a century, these bodies were interred in the cemetery's crypts. Then a peculiar law was passed. A perpetual burial tax was imposed, and families who couldn't afford to pay had their deceased relatives exhumed to make room for new occupants. What the gravediggers unearthed was shocking. Instead of skeletons, they found dozens of perfectly mummified corpses, their expressions locked in apparent terror. The most disturbing among them became known as the screaming mummies. The official explanation for their expressions is post-mortem processes, jaw muscles relaxing, pressure from the surrounding earth. But local lore, whispered in hushed tones after sunset, tells a different story. They say the screams are real, a final, desperate cry from those who were not yet gone. The fear was that during a cholera outbreak in the 1830s, people were sometimes buried alive in the haste to control the disease. Imagine waking up inside a coffin, 6 feet under, the weight of the earth pressing down, the air growing thin. The only thing you can do is scream, a scream no one will ever hear, a scream that would be etched onto your face for eternity. The collection grew. and the mummies were moved from the ossuary and put on display, becoming one of Mexico's most unsettling tourist attractions. Now they stand behind glass, a silent chorus of the damned. But are they truly silent? The museum, El Museo de las Momias, is a place of profound unease. Visitors report a heavy, oppressive atmosphere, the feeling of being watched by 100 vacant eyes. Many claim to hear faint whispers echoing through the halls, even when they are alone. The disembodied sounds seem to curl from the open mouths of the mummified figures, as if they are trying to communicate, to share the story of their final, terrifying moments. Security guards who patrol the museum at night have their own stories, tales they are often reluctant to share. They speak of shadows moving in their peripheral vision, of the distinct sound of shuffling footsteps on the stone floors when the building is empty. One guard reported hearing what sounded like a woman weeping, the sound coming directly from the chamber that houses the mummified infants. He searched the entire museum, finding nothing, yet the sobbing continued, a heartbreaking lament that seemed to emanate from the very walls. Another account speaks of a tall, slender shadow that detaches itself from the wall near the mummy of a man known as Dr. Remigio Leroy, the first to be discovered. The shadow is said to glide through the exhibit before vanishing into thin air. The mummies themselves seem to possess a residual energy. The one known as La Bruja, or the Witch, is particularly feared. Legend says she was a practitioner of dark arts in life, and her curse lingers. People who have stood before her glass case report sudden chills, feelings of nausea, and an overwhelming sense of dread. Some have even claimed her eyes, though shriveled and sunken, seem to follow them as they move. Is it merely the power of suggestion? Or does some malevolent force still cling to her earthly remains? Perhaps the most harrowing tales concern what happens when the lights go out. A former janitor swore he would never again work the night shift after an experience that left him shaken for weeks. While cleaning near the display of a woman who was allegedly buried alive, he heard a scratching sound. It was faint at first, like a rat in the walls, but it grew louder, more frantic. It sounded like fingernails scraping against wood, coming from inside the glass case. He froze, his flashlight beam fixed on the mummy. Its gnarled fingers were still, its agonized expression unchanged. But the sound was undeniable, a desperate attempt to claw its way out of an eternal prison. He dropped his supplies and fled, refusing to return. These aren't isolated incidents. Tourists have captured strange anomalies in their photographs. Orbs of light, misty figures, and faces that seem to appear in the reflections on the glass. Audio recordings taken within the museum have picked up electronic voice phenomena, or EVPs. When analyzed, these recordings reveal faint, raspy whispers. Words like "ayúdame," help me, and frío, cold, have allegedly been deciphered, a ghostly plea from beyond the grave. The question remains, what is the source of this paranormal activity? Are they the restless spirits of those buried alive, their souls trapped in a perpetual state of fear and confusion? Or is it something else? The sheer concentration of death and suffering in one place could have created a psychic imprint on the environment, a residual haunting that plays out on a loop night after night. The emotions felt in those final moments, the terror, the suffocation, the despair, might have been so powerful that they soaked into the very stone and soil of the pantheon. Consider the physical state of the mummies. Their skin is stretched taut over their bones, their mouths wrenched open. They are a physical embodiment of a nightmare. This intense visual stimulus could act as a trigger, a focal point for spiritual energy. It's as if their horrific final moments have given them a permanent anchor to our world. They are not just preserved bodies, they are conduits, broadcasting their agony across the veil that separates the living from the dead. The city of Guanajuato itself is built over a network of old silver mining tunnels. These subterranean passages run beneath the cemetery and the museum. Some paranormal investigators theorize that such tunnel systems can act as conductors for spiritual energy, amplifying the whispers and footsteps that echo from the crypts. Perhaps the sounds heard by the guards are not confined to the museum, but travel through these underground arteries, the collective moans of a city's forgotten dead. Even the smallest mummies, the infants, are not at peace. Their tiny forms are some of the most tragic in the collection. One, known as the world's smallest mummy, was the fetus of a woman who fell victim to the cholera epidemic. Visitors often leave toys and flowers at their display cases, but these gestures of sympathy don't seem to quiet the spirits. The sounds of faint crying are often reported near them, a sorrow so profound it transcends time. Could the screams be a warning? The legend of La Llorona, the weeping woman, is prevalent throughout Mexico. She is a spirit who mourns her drowned children, her cries a harbinger of misfortune. Some locals believe the screaming mummies are a similar omen, a physical manifestation of a curse upon the land. They believe the mummies are trying to warn the living of an impending disaster. Their silent screams, a prophecy that no one is able to interpret. The phenomenon is not static. Reports of activity seem to increase during certain times of the year, particularly around the Day of the Dead, when the veil between worlds is said to be at its thinnest. During this time, the whispers are said to become clearer, the footsteps more distinct. It is as if the mummies are aware of the celebrations for the dead and are trying desperately to join, to make their presence known, to cry out that they are still here, trapped between life and true death. The museum staff has grown accustomed to the strangeness, treating it as just another part of the building's character. They replace light bulbs that mysteriously burn out and straighten pictures that are found tilted on the walls without explanation. They try to rationalize the cold spots and the disembodied voices. But in the quiet moments, when a door closes on its own or a faint sigh is heard from an empty corridor, even the most skeptical among them must wonder. They are the daily custodians of 100 tormented souls, forever guarding a choir of the screaming dead. Every person who enters the museum leaves with a piece of its oppressive chill. The image of those faces is not easily forgotten, and for some, the experience is more profound. They take home more than just a memory. They take home the unsettling feeling of being followed, the echo of a whisper in their ear. The mummies of Guanajuato stand as a testament to a bizarre chapter in history, but they are also a chilling, active reminder that some screams do not fade with time. They petrify, they linger, and they wait in the darkness for someone to listen. They are a chorus of silent torment, and their story is told not in words, but in the unending, audible silence of their agony, a sound that resonates deep within the walls of the museum and in the minds of all who have dared to look upon their faces. The air grows cold, and a shuffling sound echoes from the far end of the hall. Another night has begun at the Museo de las Momias, and the residents are growing restless. The island's dark past begins during the Roman era, when it was used to isolate plague victims, their bodies left to decay where they fell. Centuries later, during the Black Death, the horror was repeated on a massive scale. Venice, desperate to halt the spread of the contagion, shipped anyone showing the slightest symptom to Poveglia. Tens of thousands were sent there, not for treatment, but to die. The dead were burned in giant pits, their ashes and charred bones mixing with the soil. It is said that even today, the soil of Poveglia is more than 50% human remains. Fishermen in the lagoon give the island a wide berth. Claiming their nets sometimes drag up human bones from the waters surrounding it. But the island's story of suffering didn't end with the plague. In 1922, a large mental hospital was constructed on Poveglia. The isolation that once contained disease was now used to contain the mentally ill. Patients immediately began reporting that the island was not a place of healing, but of torment. They spoke of seeing the shadowy figures of plague victims, their tormented spirits still wandering the grounds. They heard constant whispers and agonizing screams echoing through the wards, sounds that the staff dismissed as products of their troubled minds. But were they? The patients insisted the ghosts of the plague dead were restless, angry at having their final resting place disturbed. The hospital's reputation was forever stained by the actions of one particular doctor. The details are murky, lost to rumor and legend, but the story that persists is one of unspeakable cruelty. This doctor, driven by a perverse curiosity, believed he could cure insanity by performing lobotomies and other experimental procedures. He chose his patients from the most vulnerable, those with no family to question their treatment. Using crude tools like hand drills, hammers, and chisels, he conducted these brutal experiments in the hospital's bell tower, far from the prying eyes of his colleagues. The patients' screams, they say, were masked by the ringing of the bell, but the doctor could not escape the island's malevolent influence. He too began to see the spirits. The tormented souls of his own victims, along with the legions of plague dead, began to haunt him relentlessly. They drove him mad, their whispers turning into a deafening chorus inside his head. One day, consumed by terror, he climbed to the top of the very bell tower where he had inflicted so much pain. Some say he jumped, others claim he was pushed by an unseen force, a spectral hand of vengeance. A nurse who witnessed the fall claimed that as he lay dying on the ground below, a misty fog rose from the earth and enveloped his body, choking the last breath from him. After the hospital closed in 1968, Poveglia was completely abandoned. The buildings fell into ruin, reclaimed by nature, but the entities that call it home remained. For decades, the Italian government has forbidden all travel to the island. It is strictly off limits to tourists and locals alike. But this has only fueled the curiosity of paranormal investigators and thrill seekers who dare to trespass. Those who have made the illicit journey report a tangible sense of dread that descends the moment they step ashore. The air is heavy, oppressive, and filled with the scent of decay. Investigators using electronic voice phenomenon or EVP equipment have captured chilling recordings. When asked, "Who are you?" a faint, raspy voice replies, "Plague." Other recordings have picked up disembodied screams, agonizing moans, and the distinct sound of a child crying out for its mother. One team of ghost hunters fled the island in terror after a voice from their spirit box screamed, "Leave!" directly at them. They reported being scratched and pushed by invisible hands. Another group spent the night in the dilapidated hospital, only to be chased out by a dark, towering shadow that manifested at the end of a long corridor. They described it as a solid black mass, darker than the surrounding shadows, radiating an aura of pure malevolence. Inside the asylum, objects are known to move on their own. Doors slam shut in empty hallways, and the sound of footsteps echoes from the floors above. Many visitors have captured photographic evidence of what they believe to be full-bodied apparitions, misty figures standing in doorways or peering from the broken windows of the hospital. The most frequently reported sighting is that of a small child, often seen weeping in a corner of the former children's ward. They say she is the ghost of a girl named Maria, who was separated from her parents and died of the plague on the island. Her spirit is said to be trapped, forever searching for them. The bell tower remains a focal point of the paranormal activity. Locals from the nearby islands of Lido and Pellestrina claim that on quiet nights they can still hear the bell of Poveglia tolling across the water, even though the bell itself was removed decades ago. Investigators who have ventured into the tower report sudden, drastic drops in temperature and the feeling of being watched by an unseen intelligence. Many have felt a sense of overwhelming despair and a sudden irrational urge to jump, as if the doctor's final moments are forever imprinted on the location. Even the soil itself seems cursed. Visitors have reported developing sudden, inexplicable red rashes on their skin after walking the grounds, rashes that disappear as soon as they leave the island. It's as if the very earth, saturated with the ashes of the dead, is toxic to the living. The psychic energy is so powerful that even skeptics have left the island shaken, unable to explain the oppressive atmosphere and the terrifying experiences they endured. They speak of a collective consciousness of pain, a psychic scream that has been echoing for centuries. The island doesn't just feel haunted, it feels alive with agony. Every crumbling wall and overgrown path seems to hold a memory of suffering. The entities on Poveglia are not believed to be benign. They are described as angry and territorial. One investigator who dared to taunt the spirits was violently thrown against a wall by an invisible force, leaving him with deep scratches on his back. His camera, which had been recording, was found smashed on the floor, the memory card corrupted beyond recovery. The message is clear: the living are not welcome here. This is a kingdom of the dead, a place where thousands of souls are trapped in an eternal cycle of pain and despair. They were brought here against their will in life, and in death they are unable to leave. The island is their prison, and they guard it fiercely. The malevolent energy has seeped into the very fabric of the place, creating a vortex of paranormal activity unlike almost anywhere else on Earth. The spirits of the plague victims, the asylum patients, and the mad doctor are all said to linger, their combined torment creating a palpable atmosphere of terror. The ground you walk on is made of their remains, the air you breathe is filled with their whispers, and the shadows you see are not just shadows. On Pavelia, you are never truly alone. These lonely stretches of asphalt, arteries of a nation, hold more than just the echoes of roaring engines and forgotten road songs. They are conduits for something else, something spectral. Since the dawn of the automobile, drivers have reported chilling encounters, brief moments where the veil between worlds seems to thin. They see a figure on the shoulder, thumb outstretched, a silent plea in the dark. These are the phantom hitchhikers, eternal travelers on a road to nowhere. Perhaps the most famous of these spectral highways is Route 66, the Mother Road. For decades, tales have been whispered in truck stops and roadside diners. A lone driver, pushing through the Arizona desert late at night, sees a young woman in a dated white dress. He pulls over, a good Samaritan in the vast emptiness. She climbs into the passenger seat, giving him an address just a few miles down the road. They make small talk, or sometimes she's completely silent, her gaze fixed on the endless ribbon of blacktop ahead. As they approach the address, a small, unassuming house, the driver turns to her, only to find the seat empty. The door never opened. The seatbelt is still buckled. Confused and shaken, he approaches the house. An elderly resident answers the door, their face etched with a familiar sadness. "You've seen her, haven't you?" they ask. "That was our daughter. She died on this road right on this night, 40 years ago. You're not the first to bring her home." This pattern repeats across the country, a chilling template of loss and longing. In Chicago, she's known as Resurrection Mary. For nearly a century, motorists around Resurrection Cemetery have reported picking up a beautiful young woman with blonde hair and blue eyes, wearing a white party dress. She's often seen outside the O. Henry Ballroom, a popular dance hall. She's quiet, ethereal. When the car passes the gates of the cemetery, she simply vanishes. Research into local history points to a young woman named Mary Bregovi, who was killed in a car accident in 1934 after a night of dancing. Her parents buried her in Resurrection Cemetery, forever linking her spirit to the place of her final rest. Cab drivers in Chicago have logged dozens of accounts. Some have even reported paying her fare, only to find the money gone when they check their logbook. One story tells of a driver who saw her and slammed on the brakes, thinking he had hit someone. He got out to find nothing but a faint indentation on his front fender, and 2 small handprints seared into the metal. Why roads? Why these liminal spaces? A road is a place of transition, a non-place between a starting point and a destination. For these spirits, the journey itself has become the destination. They are caught in a loop, forever replaying their final moments, forever trying to get home, a home they can never reach. It's a journey between life and death, and they are trapped in the in-between. These encounters are not random. They are moments of profound, unresolved tragedy breaking through into our reality. The phenomenon is not unique to America. Across the Pacific, in Japan, the aftermath of the devastating 2011 tsunami created a new generation of phantom hitchhikers, known as yurei. In the hard-hit coastal regions of Ishinomaki and Tohoku, taxi drivers began reporting eerily similar experiences. They would pick up a young person, often soaked as if they had just come from the sea, who would ask to be taken to a part of town that no longer existed, a neighborhood washed away by the waves. One driver recounted picking up a young woman who asked to be taken to Minamihama. He explained that the area was gone. The woman then asked in a trembling voice, "Have I died?" By the time the driver turned to look at her in the rear-view mirror, she was gone. The passenger seat was merely damp. Sociologists who studied these accounts found a common thread. The passengers were almost always young. They were spirits cut down in their prime, confused and disoriented, their deaths so sudden and violent they haven't yet comprehended their own passing. These drivers weren't just experiencing a haunting, they were serving as unwitting grief counselors for the dead, providing a final compassionate ear to those who had their voices stolen by the sea. They would start the meter, as a sign of respect. When the passenger vanished, the drivers would still pay the fare themselves, a final act of kindness for a soul lost in the storm. Back on the lonely highways of the American West, another variation of the legend persists. This time it's not a gentle spirit seeking a ride home, but a warning. A trucker barreling down a mountain pass sees a man frantically waving his arms by the side of the road. He pulls his rig over. The man, breathless and panicked, tells him there's a terrible accident just around the blind curve ahead. A jackknife truck, a school bus. The trucker thanks him, gets back in his cab and proceeds with extreme caution. He rounds the corner and sure enough, the scene is exactly as described. He narrowly avoids a catastrophic pileup. Relieved, he looks for the man who warned him, to thank him properly, but he's vanished. Later, at a way station, he tells his story to a highway patrol officer. The officer nods grimly. "You're lucky," he says. "The man you're describing, he died in that same spot 5 years ago. He was the first one on the scene of a similar wreck, trying to warn people. Looks like he's still on duty." These guardian angels of the asphalt are a reminder that not all spirits are trapped by sorrow. Some, it seems, are bound by a sense of duty that transcends even death itself. Consider the Bluebell Hill in Kent, England. On a foggy November night in 1965, a car crash claimed the lives of 3 young women, one of whom was a bride-to-be. Since then, the A229 road that runs over the hill has become one of Britain's most haunted locations. Drivers report a young woman suddenly appearing in the road, forcing them to swerve or brake hard. They get out, fearing the worst, but find no one. Others have given a lift to a young woman who talks of her upcoming wedding before disappearing from the moving car, leaving behind a profound sense of cold and an unexplainable sadness. One man claimed he hit a girl who ran in front of him. He found her sitting on the curb, her knees bleeding. He offered her a blanket and went to call for help. When he returned with the police, she was gone, but the blanket was there, lying on the road. The police told him it was the anniversary of the crash. They've received calls like his every year. These stories, passed down from driver to driver, become a part of the road's very identity. They are modern folklore, campfire tales for the age of the internal combustion engine. The phantom hitchhiker is a manifestation of our collective anxieties about the road, the fear of the unknown, the dangers of high speed, the profound loneliness of a long journey in the dark. The figure on the side of the road is an emblem of vulnerability, a symbol of a journey cut short. When a driver stops, they are extending a hand of compassion, bridging the gap between the living and the dead for just a few fleeting miles. They become participants in a drama that started long before they arrived and will continue long after they're gone. The road, after all, remembers everything, every breakdown, every wrong turn, every life lost in a split second of screeching tires and shattering glass. And sometimes on a dark night when the conditions are just right, it shares those memories with those who are just passing through. The hitchhiker doesn't want a ride to a physical place. They want a ride back to a time that no longer exists, a moment before everything went wrong. And for the drivers who encounter them, the road ahead is never quite the same. They carry the ghost with them, a silent passenger for the rest of their journey, a chilling reminder that some travelers never ever reach their final destination. For centuries, a chilling mystery has haunted the dark, tangled heart of the Louisiana bayou, deep within the cypress swamps, where the Spanish moss hangs like ghostly shrouds. Eerie, disembodied lights dance in the oppressive darkness. Locals call them feux follets, the foolish fire, or simply the ghost lights. These aren't just faint glimmers, they are vibrant orbs of light, sometimes blue, sometimes green, often a fiery orange, that bob, weave, and sometimes charge at unsuspecting witnesses before vanishing without a trace. The Cajuns have whispered tales about these lights for generations. Some say they are the tormented souls of the unbaptized, forever lost in the swamp, their lanterns guiding others to a watery grave. One of the most enduring legends is that of a wicked plantation owner, a man so cruel that not even the devil would claim his soul. He was condemned to wander the swamps for eternity, his lantern swinging as he searches for a path out of his self-made purgatory. To see his light, they say, is to be marked for misfortune. But is this merely folklore? In 1962, two duck hunters, Jean-Paul and his cousin Antoine, found themselves lost as dusk fell over the Atchafalaya Basin. The familiar landmarks of the swamp had dissolved into an impenetrable wall of black. Panic began to set in when in the distance a single warm light appeared. Believing it to be a fellow hunter's camp, they paddled their pirogue towards it. The light seemed to beckon, floating gently just above the water's surface, but as they drew closer, it darted away, leading them deeper into a maze of cypress knees and alligator-infested waters. The light then split into 3 separate orbs, which circled their small boat, casting an unnatural, silent glow. The air grew cold, and the chirping of crickets ceased. Jean-Paul later recounted that he felt an overwhelming sense of dread, as if something ancient and intelligent was observing them. The lights then shot straight up into the night sky and disappeared. They were found the next morning, miles from where they started, their boat inexplicably lodged high in the branches of a cypress tree. Skeptics have long tried to dismiss the phenomena as swamp gas, methane produced by decaying vegetation that ignites spontaneously. However, this explanation fails to account for the light's complex and seemingly intelligent behavior. Eyewitnesses consistently report the orbs reacting to their presence, following them, or even communicating through intricate patterns of light. Swamp gas doesn't chase people. It doesn't split into multiple independently moving lights. Furthermore, many sightings occur in areas with no significant decomposition, and on nights with no atmospheric conditions suitable for spontaneous ignition. The scientific explanation simply doesn't fit the sheer volume and consistency of the reports. These are not random flickers. They are structured, deliberate, and deeply unsettling. This brings us to a more modern and equally terrifying theory: extraterrestrial reconnaissance. UFO researchers have drawn startling parallels between the Bayou ghost lights and other aerial phenomena reported worldwide. The silent, rapid acceleration, the ability to make impossible right-angle turns, and the sudden disappearance are all hallmarks of classic UFO sightings. Could these swamps be a hotspot for alien activity? The theory posits that these lights are not ghostly spirits but advanced drones or probes sent by an off-world intelligence to study the region's unique biodiversity, or perhaps something hidden deeper within the earth. The bayou, with its dense, inaccessible terrain, provides the perfect cover for clandestine operations. Some abductees have even reported memories of being floated over swampland, a silent glowing orb guiding their captor's craft. Are these lights the vanguard of a silent, ongoing alien survey of our planet? Consider the case of the Dubois family in 1981. They lived on the edge of the Honey Island swamp. For weeks they were terrorized by lights that would appear nightly outside their windows. They weren't distant glows, they were intense, basketball-sized spheres of energy that would hover just feet from the glass, flooding the rooms with a pulsating, cold light. The family's dog would whimper and hide. Electronic devices would fail. Mr. Dubois, a no-nonsense fisherman, fired his shotgun at one of the orbs. He said the buckshot passed right through it with no effect, before the light simply blinked out of existence. The local sheriff investigated, finding scorch marks on the ground where the lights had hovered, but no other physical evidence. The family eventually abandoned their home, unable to withstand the psychological pressure of being watched by these silent, inexplicable visitors. Perhaps the truth is even stranger, rooted not in gas or aliens, but in the very fabric of reality itself. Parapsychologists and quantum physicists have explored the hypothesis that certain locations on Earth act as windows or conduits to other dimensions. These are places where the veil between our world and another is unusually thin. These liminal spaces, often associated with high levels of geomagnetic energy, could allow energy, or even entities, from another reality to bleed through. The bayou, with its vast, ancient water systems and unique geological makeup, could be one such place. The ghost lights in this view are not souls or ships, but literal glimpses into another plane of existence. They are spectral energy signatures, manifestations of a reality that operates under a different set of physical laws. When people report a feeling of deep unease or of time distortion in the presence of the lights, they might be experiencing a subtle but profound collision of two separate dimensions. This theory gains traction when we examine the folklore more closely. The tales of spirits and lost souls might not be literal, but rather a primitive attempt to describe an experience that defies conventional explanation. The lantern of the damned might be a metaphor for an energy form our ancestors could not comprehend. The feeling of being led astray could be the result of a localized warping of space-time. In 2003, a team of paranormal investigators spent a week in the Manchac Swamp, armed with electromagnetic field detectors, thermal cameras, and full-spectrum audio recorders. On their third night, their equipment went haywire. EMF meters spiked off the charts, while thermal cameras captured cold spots moving in perfect sync with a visible orb of light. But the most disturbing evidence came from the audio. In the dead silence of the swamp, their recorders picked up a low, rhythmic hum that had no discernible source. When analyzed, the frequency of this hum did not match any known natural or man-made sound. It was, for all intents and purposes, a sound from nowhere. The lights have also been linked to disappearances. Over the decades, an unnerving number of people have vanished without a trace in the swamps of Louisiana. While the treacherous environment is often to blame, some cases defy easy explanation. Take Thomas Finley, an experienced trapper who went missing in 1995. His boat was found empty, with his tools and a half-eaten meal still inside. There were no signs of a struggle, no tracks leading away from the boat. The official cause of death was listed as lost to the elements, but his family tells a different story. For weeks leading up to his disappearance, Thomas had been telling them about a swarm of fireflies big as your fist that had been following his boat at night. He said they were beautiful, but that they made him feel hollow and cold. Was he simply the latest victim of the swamp, or was he lured away by the strange, intelligent lights he had encountered? The question lingers unanswered, adding another layer of dread to the phenomenon. The patterns of the lights themselves suggest a form of communication. Witnesses have described them blinking in sequence, forming geometric shapes, or mirroring each other's movements in a kind of silent aerial ballet. In 2011, a group of college students on a canoe trip captured what is perhaps the most compelling footage to date. Their video shows 3 orange lights hovering over the water. For nearly 2 minutes, the lights move in a complex, synchronized pattern, almost as if they are tracing a map or a diagram in the air. At one point, they form a perfect triangle, hold the position for several seconds, and then collapse back into a single point of light before shooting off. Cryptographers and mathematicians who have analyzed the footage have been unable to decode the pattern, but many agree it doesn't appear random. It seems purposeful, a message without a key, a language we have yet to comprehend. What are they trying to tell us? Is it a warning, an invitation, or something far more alien to our understanding? This lack of understanding is perhaps the most terrifying aspect of the ghost lights. Whether they are the restless dead, alien probes, or interdimensional leaks, they represent a profound and unsettling unknown that exists right at the edge of our civilized world. They defy our science, mock our explanations, and continue their silent, nightly dance in the darkest corners of the bayou. They are a constant reminder that there are things in this world that we do not understand, forces that operate beyond our perception. The Cajun people have a saying, "Ce qui est dans le marais reste dans le marais." What is in the swamp stays in the swamp. It's a warning to respect the boundaries of the known world. Because when you paddle into the deep, dark water, under the watchful eyes of the cypress trees, you may see the lights, and they may see you. They have been there for centuries, waiting in the darkness, their purpose a mystery, their origin unknown. They are a puzzle woven from light and shadow, and for those who encounter them, the world is never quite the same again. The swamp keeps its secrets well, and the lights are its most beautiful and most terrifying guardians. But it was the Rosenheim case in 1967 that truly brought the phenomenon into the cold, hard light of scientific scrutiny. In a quiet law office in Bavaria, inexplicable events began to unfold. Fluorescent tubes would swing and explode without cause. Telephones would dial the speaking clock service repeatedly, racking up huge bills. The electrical grid itself seemed to go haywire. Power surges, inexplicable short circuits. The local power company was baffled. They installed monitoring equipment, recording massive, unexplainable spikes in electrical activity that coincided perfectly with the paranormal events. The focus of the investigation soon shifted to a young, emotionally troubled 19-year-old employee, Annemarie Schäberl. Physicists Hans Bender and Friedbert Karger from the Max Planck Institute arrived on the scene. Their findings were staggering. They documented objects moving without contact, caught on camera. Every time Anne-Marie walked down the hall, light fixtures would swing violently behind her. They concluded the phenomena were real, not fraudulent, and were directly linked to the girl's presence. They termed it recurrent spontaneous psychokinesis, a scientific label for a terrifying, ancient mystery. The events only stopped when Anne-Marie left the firm. This pattern, a nexus of intense, often repressed human emotion and chaotic physical manifestations, repeats throughout history. Consider the notorious case of the South Shields poltergeist in 2006. A young family, a mother and her young son, were subjected to a relentless campaign of terror. It started small, toys activating on their own, objects being moved. But it escalated with chilling speed. Threatening messages began to appear scrawled on a toy message board. "I'm going to kill you," one read. Another, "I am the devil." The boys' toys would stack themselves into impossible towers, only to come crashing down. A rocking horse would move violently on its own. The family captured dozens of these events on video, footage that has been analyzed by paranormal investigators ever since. The sheer volume and intensity of the activity were overwhelming. They documented flying knives, chairs being thrown, and dark, shadowy figures darting through rooms. The police were called multiple times, with one officer witnessing a dog bowl inexplicably flip over in front of him. He noted it in his official report, unable to offer any rational explanation. The activity seemed to center on the young boy, a vessel for an unseen force that fed on fear and turmoil. But no case is more famous or more disturbing than the Enfield poltergeist. From 1977 to 1979, a modest council house in North London became the epicenter of one of the most documented hauntings in history. The Hodgson family, particularly the two young daughters, Janet and Margaret, were at the heart of the storm. It began with knocking sounds and furniture sliding across the floor. The police were called on the very first night. A female police constable, Carolyn Heaps, signed an official witness statement confirming she saw a chair levitate and move across the room with no one touching it. This was not a family seeking attention. This was a family under siege. Investigators Maurice Gross and Guy Lyon Playfair of the Society for Psychical Research documented over 1,500 separate paranormal incidents. Lego bricks and marbles would fly through the air at high speeds, seemingly aimed to cause harm. Furniture would overturn, spontaneous fires would erupt, and just as quickly extinguish themselves. Most terrifying of all, the entity began to communicate. It used 11-year-old Janet as its mouthpiece. Her voice would contort into a deep guttural rasp, claiming to be a man named Bill Wilkins, who had supposedly died in the house years earlier. Audio recordings of these sessions are bone-chilling. The voice speaks of its own death, a hemorrhage in the very chair the family sat in. "Just before I died, I went blind," the voice rasped through Janet, "and then I had a hemorrhage and I fell asleep, and I died in the chair in the corner downstairs." Later investigation confirmed that a man named Bill Wilkins had indeed lived and died in the house in precisely that manner. Skeptics claimed Janet was faking it, that it was all an elaborate prank. But how could an 11-year-old girl produce that voice for hours on end without destroying her vocal cords? Medical examinations showed her vocal folds weren't even vibrating when the voice spoke. It was as if something else was speaking through her. Photographer Graham Morris, working for a daily newspaper, captured some of the most iconic images of the case, including a sequence showing Janet seemingly being thrown across her bedroom by an unseen force. He described the atmosphere in the house as electric, filled with a palpable sense of dread. He set up remote-controlled cameras, capturing objects flying from shelves with no one near them. The evidence was overwhelming, yet defied all rational explanation. This leads us to a fascinating and disturbing theory, one that moves beyond the idea of ghosts or spirits of the dead. What if a poltergeist isn't an external entity at all? What if it's a raw, untamed projection of the human mind? Psychokinesis, or PK, is the theoretical ability to influence a physical system without physical interaction. Proponents of the living agent theory suggest that in times of extreme emotional distress, trauma, or hormonal upheaval, often centered around an adolescent, the subconscious mind can lash out, unleashing torrents of psychic energy that warp the physical world. This energy, unfocused and chaotic, could be responsible for the thrown objects, the strange noises, the electrical disturbances. The individual at the center, the agent, is often completely unaware they are the source. Anna-Marie Schabel in Rosenheim, Janet Hodgson in Enfield, both were young girls on the cusp of womanhood, dealing with significant family stress. The poltergeist in this view is a violent, externalized tantrum of the subconscious mind. Re-examining the Enfield tapes with this theory in mind changes the context. Is the Bill Wilkins voice truly a disembodied spirit, or is it a complex psychic construct, a story woven by Janet's subconscious from fragments of information she may have overheard about the house's history? The entity's behavior was often childish and attention-seeking, mirroring the actions of a troubled adolescent. It would respond to challenges, play games, and seem to enjoy the chaos it created. This aligns more with the psychology of a living person than the motivations of a lingering spirit. The poltergeist then becomes a manifestation of internal pain, a scream made manifest in the physical world. This theory also helps explain the Rosenheim case's peculiar focus on technology. Anna-Marie worked in an office, a place of technology and order. The psychic energy she projected may have subconsciously targeted the very symbols of the environment causing her stress. The phones, the lights, the electrical system all became victims of her internal turmoil. The physicists at the Max Planck Institute recorded the physical effects but couldn't measure the source. How do you measure an emotion? How do you quantify despair or anger and trace its path as it rips through the fabric of reality? This isn't the realm of traditional physics. It steps into the murky waters where consciousness and the material world collide. Even the South Shields case fits the pattern. A single-parent household, a young boy at the center, a classic crucible for poltergeist activity. The threatening messages on the toy board could be interpreted as the boy's own inner fears and anxieties being projected outward. The entity's aggression could be a mirror of the turmoil within the family unit. The poltergeist acts as a psychic amplifier for hidden distress. The house isn't haunted, the person is. This is a far more intimate and arguably more terrifying explanation. It implies that the monster isn't in the closet or under the bed. It's inside you, waiting for a moment of weakness to tear your world apart. Yet the theory of the living agent doesn't explain everything. How could Janet Hodgson's subconscious know the specific details of Bill Wilkins' death? Details that were only verified after the fact? How does a projected emotion from Anna-Marie Schabel cause a specific number, the speaking clock, to be dialed repeatedly? The phenomena often display an intelligence and a knowledge that the supposed agent does not possess. This points back to the classic interpretation. A discarnate entity, a spirit with its own consciousness and agenda, attaching itself to a vulnerable individual and using their energy to interact with our world. Perhaps the adolescent agent doesn't create the force, but merely acts as a battery, a power source for something else, something ancient and intelligent. This duality lies at the heart of the poltergeist mystery. Is it a psychological phenomenon, a rare and extreme manifestation of human potential? Or is it a spiritual one, proof of survival after death and the existence of other realms? The evidence from these infamous cases can be used to argue both sides convincingly. The swinging lights of Rosenheim point to psychokinesis. The voice of Bill Wilkins points to a spirit. The flying knives of South Shields could be either. The truth is, we are dealing with a force that operates outside our known laws of science and understanding. The police reports, the eyewitness accounts, the audio and video recordings, they all tell us the same thing. The events were real. The chair really did move. The voice really did speak. The objects really did fly. These are not just stories. They are documented incursions of the impossible into the ordinary world. They are diary entries from the edge of reality, chronicling a force that can turn a home into a war zone and a child's mind into a gateway for... The Geiger counter crackles, a constant, unnerving reminder of the invisible poison that saturates the air, the soil, the very concrete beneath your feet. But it's not just radiation that lingers in the Chernobyl exclusion zone. There's something else, an energy, a presence. For decades, those who venture into this haunted landscape, liquidators, scientists, soldiers on patrol, have returned with stories that defy conventional explanation, stories of figures seen at the edge of their vision, standing silently amidst the decaying apartment blocks of Pripyat. They call them the spirits of Chernobyl. Witnesses describe them in various ways. Some report seeing dark human-shaped shadows moving through the abandoned schools and hospitals, figures that seem to absorb the light around them. Others speak of apparitions in full, bulky radiation suits, standing guard near the sarcophagus of Reactor 4, their faces obscured by dark visors. These aren't just fleeting glimpses. Soldiers on lonely night patrols have described seeing these figures for extended periods, watching them from a distance before they simply vanish, leaving no footprints in the snow or mud. One of the most chilling accounts comes from a team of stalkers, illegal explorers of the zone, who camped overnight in a Pripyat apartment building. In the dead of night, they were awakened by a soft, rhythmic thumping from the floor above. As they listened, the sound was joined by the faint, muffled cries of what sounded like a child. Terrified, they packed their gear and fled. But as they looked back at the building, they saw a small, flickering light in the window of the apartment directly above where they had been sleeping. A single, solitary light in a city that has been without power for over 3 decades. Paranormal investigators who have gained access to the zone have documented extraordinary evidence. Using electromagnetic field, or EMF detectors, they've recorded massive, unexplained spikes in energy in locations with no apparent power source. These spikes often coincide with sudden, drastic drops in temperature and the feeling of being watched. In the infamous Pripyat amusement park, investigators have placed balls on the seats of the Ferris wheel, only to watch them roll off on their own, as if pushed by an unseen hand. Audio recordings from these sessions are even more disturbing. When filtered and amplified, electronic voice phenomena, or EVPs, are captured. Faint, disembodied voices speaking in Ukrainian and Russian. Words like leave, help, and sometimes just a name, whispered from the static. The scientific community dismisses these claims, attributing them to psychological stress, the play of light and shadow in a decaying environment, or the effects of low-level radiation on the human brain. But can that truly explain everything? Can it explain the shared experiences of hundreds of people over dozens of years? The theory gaining traction among paranormal researchers is one of energy residue. The concept is simple yet terrifying. The Chernobyl disaster wasn't just a nuclear accident. It was an event of unimaginable trauma and sudden, violent death for thousands. That immense release of human energy, fear, pain, anguish, was instantaneously fused with the cataclysmic release of nuclear energy. Think of it like a photograph. The intense flash of radiation didn't just burn images into the physical world. It burned the very consciousness, the spiritual essence of those who perished, into the fabric of the environment itself. The spirits aren't ghosts in the traditional sense. They are echoes, traces of human energy trapped in a perpetual loop, forever replaying their final moments. or simply existing, imprinted onto the landscape by the most powerful force man has ever unleashed. The radiation that permeates the zone acts as a constant power source, sustaining these energy imprints, preventing them from fading away like a normal memory. This is why the figures often appear in radiation suits. It's what the firefighters and liquidators wore as they fought a battle they could not win. Their final heroic act, their last conscious thought, was to fight the invisible fire. And so, their energy signature remains, forever on guard. The glowing shadows could be the imprints of those vaporized in the initial blast. Their physical forms turned to energy, their silhouettes literally burned into reality. Consider the case of the Black Bird of Chernobyl. In the days leading up to the disaster, multiple workers at the power plant reported seeing a massive black bird-like creature with glowing red eyes circling over Reactor 4. They described an overwhelming sense of dread that accompanied the sightings. After the explosion, the creature was never seen again. Some researchers now theorize this wasn't a cryptid or an omen, but a manifestation of the building negative energy, a psychic projection from the stressed and overworked staff, given form by the unique atmospheric conditions of the area. A warning from the collective unconscious made manifest. One particular hot spot for activity is Hospital 126 in Pripyat. This is where the first firefighters, the first victims of acute radiation syndrome, were taken. Their contaminated clothing still lies in a heap in the hospital's basement, emitting dangerously high levels of radiation to this day. It is a place of immense suffering. Visitors and investigators alike report hearing disembodied moans, the sounds of shuffling feet, and the overwhelming feeling of despair and pain. On one expedition, a thermal camera picked up a human-shaped heat signature huddled in the corner of a dark room. It remained there for nearly a minute before fading into the cold, its temperature dropping until it matched the surrounding environment. There was nothing in the room to explain it. The soldiers who patrol the Red Forest, one of the most contaminated areas on Earth, have their own legends. They speak of the whispers in the pines. They claim that on quiet nights, if you stand still among the mutated rust-colored trees, you can hear faint whispers carried on the wind, not just the sound of the breeze, but distinct sibilant voices. They believe it's the voices of the forest itself, a conscious entity created from the fusion of organic life and nuclear fallout, or perhaps the collective voices of those who were tasked with burying the radioactive topsoil. There's a story of a dosimetrist who was taking readings deep within the sarcophagus, the concrete shell built over Reactor 4. He was alone, navigating the dark labyrinthine corridors when his equipment began to fail. His flashlight flickered and died. Plunged into absolute darkness, he heard a sound behind him, a slow, heavy scrape, like a boot being dragged across concrete. He froze, his heart pounding. The sound grew closer. He could feel a cold spot moving toward him, a pressure change in the air. He fumbled for his backup light, and as the beam sprang to life, it illuminated a figure standing just 10 feet away. It wore the tattered remnants of a plant worker's uniform, but its face was a swirling vortex of shadow, a void where features should have been. The dosimetrist screamed and ran, not stopping until he was back in the relative safety of the control room. His dosimeter was later found to be completely fried, not from a simple malfunction, but from exposure to an electromagnetic pulse of impossible strength. What makes the spirits of Chernobyl so uniquely terrifying is this blend of the scientific and the supernatural. The rules of our world were broken here on April 26, 1986. The laws of physics were twisted, and perhaps the laws of life and death were broken as well. The zone is a place where the veil between worlds is thin, worn down by an atomic cataclysm. The radiation is the key. It is both the cause of the tragedy and the catalyst that sustains its paranormal echo. The figures seen wandering the empty streets of Pripyat are not merely ghosts of the dead. They are quantum echoes, fragments of consciousness trapped by radiation, forever bound to the site of their demise. They are a permanent chilling monument to the moment humanity's ambition created a hell on Earth, a wound on the world that may never truly heal. They are the living memory of the catastrophe, a constant silent reminder that some things once broken can never be fixed, and some places once poisoned will forever be haunted. The energy signatures are not fading. If anything, reports suggest they are becoming more defined, more frequent. As the physical structures of Pripyat crumble and decay, the spiritual residue seems to be growing stronger, as if feeding off the silence and desolation. It's a stark warning. The legacy of Chernobyl is not just in the soil or the water. It's in the very air you breathe, in the shadows that dance at the edge of your sight. The dead do not rest here. They wait, they watch, they remain. The line between the living and the dead, the physical and the spectral, is often thought to be absolute. But in the shadowed corners of our world, there exist entities that defy this boundary. These are not merely monsters of flesh and blood, nor are they simple phantoms. They are something in between, a terrifying fusion of both. Consider the legends of the Navajo people, tales whispered in hushed tones about the skinwalker. It is a being of immense power, a sorcerer who has achieved the ability to transform into any animal at will. But the transformation is more than just physical. Witnesses describe encounters not just with a large wolf or coyote, but with an animal that moves with unnatural speed, its eyes glowing with a malevolent, human-like intelligence. They report an overwhelming sense of dread, a psychic pressure that feels like a malevolent spirit is invading their very minds. Is this merely a shapeshifter? Or is it a human soul that has become so corrupted it can possess the form of an animal, wearing its flesh like a costume, while its ghostly essence peers out from behind the eyes? The skinwalker is said to be nearly impossible to kill, shrugging off wounds that would fell any normal creature. This resilience is a hallmark of spectral entities, suggesting its true nature is not entirely of our physical world. Further north, in the frozen forests of the Algonquin peoples, stalks the Wendigo. Traditionally, it is a creature born from human desperation, a person who resorts to cannibalism in the harshest of winters. But the transformation is a spiritual damnation. The individual soul is consumed by a ravenous, eternal hunger, their body twisting into a gaunt, skeletal caricature of a human, impossibly tall with long, clawed fingers and an insatiable appetite for human flesh. Those who have claimed to see the Wendigo describe it moving silently through the trees, a specter of famine and death. It's often accompanied by a feeling of profound despair and the scent of decay, phenomena commonly associated with hauntings. The Wendigo isn't just a physical monster, it's a curse, a spirit of insatiable greed given form. It is the ghost of a person's worst impulses, forever trapped between the agony of its past life and the horror of its current existence, haunting the forests where it first sinned. The creature's very presence seems to warp the environment, bringing with it an unnatural winter chill, as if the coldness of the grave follows in its wake. This blending of worlds is not confined to ancient folklore. On the night of November 15th, 1966 in West Virginia, two young couples driving near an old TNT plant saw something that would forever haunt them. A massive, winged figure, 7 feet tall, with a 10-foot wingspan and large, hypnotic red eyes that glowed in the darkness. They fled in terror, but the creature kept pace with their car, even as it reached speeds of 100 miles per hour. This was the first widely reported sighting of the entity that would become known as Mothman. Over the next 13 months, dozens more would report seeing the creature, often near the same TNT area. But the sightings were accompanied by other strange phenomena, bizarre prophecies delivered through dreams, encounters with menacing men in black, and poltergeist activity in the homes of witnesses. Mothman itself was a phantom. It appeared and disappeared in an instant, made no sound as it flew, and seemed to possess a telepathic ability to instill pure, paralyzing fear. It wasn't just an unknown animal. It was a herald, a psychic omen. The sightings culminated in the tragic collapse of the Silver Bridge on December 15, 1967, after which Mothman was never seen in the area again. Was this creature a physical being? Or was it a psychic projection, a ghostly harbinger drawn to the impending disaster, a warning from another dimension. Then there is the case of the dogman, a creature reported across the American Midwest, particularly in Michigan. Sightings describe a bipedal canine, standing over 7 feet tall, with the torso of a man and the head of a wolf or dog. Its terrifying howl, described as a human scream mixed with a canine howl, chills the blood of those who hear it. While it appears as a solid physical beast, many of its encounters have a ghostly quality. It is often seen near ancient burial mounds or in areas with a history of strange phenomena. Witnesses report a sense of being watched long before the creature appears, an oppressive feeling that is a classic sign of a spiritual presence. Some accounts describe the dogman vanishing into thin air or running at impossible speeds before disappearing from sight. One famous account, known as the Gable film, purports to show the creature charging a vehicle, its movements both animalistic and unnervingly human. This has led some researchers to question if the dogman is a flesh and blood cryptid at all. Could it be a guardian spirit, a totemic entity bound to the land? Or perhaps it's a form of lycanthropy where the transformation is not physical, but astral, a human spirit temporarily projecting a monstrous canine form. These creatures challenge our understanding of reality. They are not simply undiscovered animals or lingering spirits. They exist in the liminal space between. Think of the skinwalker's glowing eyes, windows not to an animal soul but to a corrupted human spirit trapped within. Think of the Wendigo, the ghost of hunger given monstrous form, its very presence a spiritual poison. It's said that just speaking its name can draw its attention, a trait more common to summon demons than to physical beasts. Its eternal craving is not just for flesh, but for the warmth of life it no longer possesses. Encounters are often prefaced by whispers on the wind or the feeling of being stalked by something unseen, a classic haunting scenario that culminates in the appearance of a physical monster. The fear it inspires is primal, tapping into our collective dread of starvation, isolation, and the loss of our own humanity. It's a ghost story made flesh. The Mothman phenomenon is perhaps the most compelling example of this overlap. The sheer variety of high strangeness surrounding its appearance points away from a simple biological explanation. The creature's glowing red eyes were said to be hypnotic, causing witnesses to lose time and experience vivid, terrifying nightmares for weeks afterward. This suggests a psychic or spiritual assault, not just a frightening visual. The creature was never seen eating or leaving physical tracks. It simply appeared, observed, and vanished. Its connection to the Silver Bridge collapse links it to traditions of spectral harbingers, like the banshee, whose wail foretells a death in the family. Mothman was a modern banshee for an entire town, its form a terrifying amalgamation of owl, man, and machine, perfectly suited to the industrial landscape it haunted. Was it trying to warn people, or was it like a phantom, simply drawn to the powerful emotions of the impending tragedy? A specter feeding on the community's collective fear and grief. Similarly, the dogman's behavior defies easy categorization. In many reports, the creature doesn't act like a predator. It stands and observes, its presence seeming more like a territorial display or a warning. Some theories propose it is a nature spirit, angered by human encroachment. Others lean into the supernatural, suggesting it's a werewolf, but one whose curse is spiritual. The transformation isn't a monthly affliction tied to the moon, but a permanent state of being, trapped between man and beast. The creature seen in the woods might be the spectral projection of someone living a normal life, their spirit taking on this monstrous form to roam the night. This would explain why no body, no bones, no definitive physical proof of a breeding population has ever been found. You cannot capture a ghost with a net, and you cannot find the bones of a curse. Its howl, that human-like scream, might be the anguish of the trapped soul crying out from within the beastly form. So we are left with a chilling question. When we hunt for cryptids, what are we actually searching for? Are we looking for a missing link in evolution? Or are we staring into the abyss of the paranormal? Perhaps some of these monsters are ghosts of a different kind, not of humans, but of concepts. The Wendigo is the ghost of hunger. The skinwalker is the ghost of corrupted power. The dogman is the ghost of our own primal nature. And Mothman, perhaps it is the ghost of the future, a spectral reflection of our own anxieties and the disasters we bring upon ourselves. These entities are not just creatures, they are living legends, stories that have taken on a life of their own, manifesting as physical and spiritual threats. They walk in the shadows between our world and the next, part monster, part ghost, and wholly terrifying. They are proof that some things do not rest peacefully, and that the boundary between life and death is far more fragile than we believe. The fear they instill is not just of being physically harmed, but of having your reality, your soul, torn apart. Because when you look into the eyes of these creatures, you may not see an animal looking back. You may see a damned and lonely spirit staring out from its fleshy prison. At the stroke of midnight, not just in one time zone, but in every time zone, the phenomena began. It was a global synchronization of the spectral. At Okiku's well in Himeji Castle, Japan, the faint, sorrowful count didn't stop at 9. It continued, 10, 11, 12, growing louder, echoing not just from the stone well, but seemingly from the very air around it. Witnesses reported the voice wasn't just counting plates, it was counting seconds, minutes, hours, as if marking time for a worldwide event. Simultaneously, thousands of miles away in Scotland, the Mackenzie poltergeist of Greyfriars Kirkyard became unusually active. Instead of isolated cold spots and faint scratches reported by late-night visitors, the heavy doors of the Black Mausoleum were seen swinging open on their own, releasing a palpable wave of cold that swept through the entire cemetery. Security cameras captured inexplicable shadows darting between the ancient tombstones, not just in one corner but across the entire grounds. These weren't the usual fleeting glimpses. They were solid, defined shapes moving with purpose. In the United States, the story was no different. At the Winchester Mystery House in California, a place famous for its architectural oddities designed to confuse spirits, every door in the 160-room mansion slammed shut at once. The sound was described by the overnight security staff as a single deafening clap of thunder that originated from within the house itself. Then a cacophony of whispers erupted, not from one or two hot spots, but from every wall, every floorboard, every twisting hallway. The voices spoke in a multitude of languages, overlapping, creating a disorienting babble of phantom conversation. Meanwhile, in Pluckley, England, a village known for its dozen-plus ghosts, all of them appeared at once. The spectral coach and horses, usually heard on a specific lane, were seen careening down the main street. The screaming man of the brickworks wasn't just a sound. A translucent figure was seen clutching its chest in the town square. The White Lady of St. Nicholas's Church was spotted not just in the churchyard, but simultaneously at the Daring Arms pub, her ethereal form passing through patrons who froze in terror. This wasn't a series of isolated hauntings. It was a coordinated global manifestation. Reports flooded in from every continent. In Bangar Fort, India, a location so feared that entry is forbidden. After sunset, the daytime guards reported hearing the distinct sounds of a bustling marketplace emanating from the ruins. The clatter of goods, the haggle of vendors, the laughter of children, all in broad daylight. The sounds were so vivid that tourists fled, believing they had stumbled into a time slip. In Mexico City, near the canals of Xochimilco, the eerie whispers associated with the Island of the Dolls transformed. Instead of faint cries, a full chorus of children's voices was heard, singing a nursery rhyme, the sound carrying for miles across the water, heard by hundreds of residents along the canals. The dolls, with their dead eyes, were seen by multiple boaters to slowly turn their heads in unison, all facing towards the city center as the singing swelled. Analysts and paranormal researchers were overwhelmed. The data points were too numerous, too consistent to be dismissed as mass hysteria. Spectrograms from audio recordings at these sites showed identical, unexplainable frequency spikes, occurring at the exact same moment, adjusted for time zone differences. It was a spectral pulse that had encircled the globe. At the Tower of London, the ghost of Anne Boleyn wasn't just seen in her usual haunting grounds. Her spectral form was captured on CCTV footage in the Jewel House, standing before the crown jewels, her translucent hand reaching out as if to touch the imperial state crown. At the same instant, in Port Arthur, Tasmania, the Lady in Blue, a ghost from the colonial era, was seen by tour groups walking out of the penitentiary ruins and heading directly towards the coastline, staring out at the ocean as if waiting. The phenomenon defied all known patterns. Ghosts are typically territorial, bound to the place of their tragedy or their mortal life. But this was different. It was as if they were responding to a silent, unseen signal. At the Aokigahara forest in Japan, the so-called Sea of Trees, compasses didn't just spin wildly. They all pointed directly east towards the Pacific. Yurei, the spirits said to wander the forest, were seen gathering in clearings, not moaning in despair but standing silently as if at attention. In the catacombs of Paris, where the bones of 6 million souls rest, tourists trapped during the event reported a sudden, absolute silence. The usual oppressive feeling of being watched vanished, only to be replaced by a low, rhythmic humming that seemed to vibrate through the bones stacked along the walls. The humming grew in intensity until light bulbs flickered and burst, plunging the tunnels into absolute darkness. When emergency lights activated, every skull in the visible ossuaries seemed to have shifted, their empty sockets all facing the tunnel exits. What was the purpose of this global display? Was it a warning? A convergence? At the ancient city of Petra in Jordan, Bedouin guides reported seeing a caravan of translucent figures, jinn on phantom camels, moving through the Sikhi, the narrow canyon leading to the treasury. They made no sound, but their forms shimmered in the desert heat, a silent procession heading towards the city's heart. In the Forbidden City in Beijing, the ghost of the weeping concubine, usually confined to a single alleyway, was seen gliding across the vast courtyards, her path tracked by dozens of security cameras as she moved from one palace to the next, a silent, sorrowful inspection of her former home. The convergence of these legends, these echoes of human history and tragedy, all stirring at once, presented a terrifying new reality. The events painted a chilling tapestry of shared human experience. From the mournful wail of the La Llorona along rivers in Latin America, which on this night was heard as far north as the Rio Grande and as far south as Patagonia, to the phantom legions of Roman soldiers marching not just under York Minster in England, but reported along the entire length of Hadrian's Wall. The dead were on the move. They were breaking their own rules, crossing their own spectral borders. Okiku's count from the well in Japan was picked up by electronic voice phenomena equipment in Greyfriars Kirkyard. The laughter from Bangor Fort in India was recorded as a faint, ghostly echo within the Winchester Mystery House. The phenomena were linking, communicating, creating a worldwide network of the dead. These weren't just stories anymore. They were data points in a global event. They are mirrors of our deepest fears, our most painful memories, our most enduring beliefs. If cultures from every corner of the earth, separated by oceans and millennia, all see them, are they all seeing the same thing, answering the same call?